Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. If you're a fan of The Writing Desk, The Wedding Dress, The Memory House, Once Upon a Prince, or many other bestsellers by Rachel Hauck, then you want to be here tonight to watch this episode where she joins us. Rachel, thank you so much for being on the show. It's so much fun to have you on. You've had quite a run with the Hallmark Channel, turning your books into movies lately. Tell us about how that relationship first bloomed.
So how I came to the Hallmark Channel was actually through my publisher, Thomas Nelson, which is an imprint of HarperCollins Christian Publishing. And they have a licensing arm, as most publishers do, where that's where they do all your foreign rights, your audio rights. And Thomas Nelson had reached out to do film rights, and they sold Once Upon a Prince to Engage Entertainment out in LA, Mara Dunbar's company, which was super exciting because if any book needed to be a movie, it was that one. And of course, it was just the perfect format for Hallmark, you know, quintessential romance, got the royalty trope. It was perfect, happily ever after, set in the South. So I had some Southern settings. There's truly this 1,000-year-old tree called Lover's Oak that's in Brunswick, Georgia. That was kind of like the setting for some of the story. So it just kind of magically fell into place. And I don't think that that was a catalyst for the wedding shop that was then optioned by another film company, Headfirst Productions and Muse Entertainment out of Canada, to be on the Hallmark Channel. But I think they're still working on that. That's kind of a relatively new deal that just happened this year. But Once Upon a Prince has done really well in their spring fling countdowns, the last 3 countdowns. It was #1 the year it came out.
Oh, wow.
It was #5 in 2019, and it was #2 this year. So yeah, so I think it's done well for them. So congratulations, Hallmark. I'm glad that it's done well for you.
When you see these beautiful scenes that first came out of your mind onto the page and then onto the screen, that must make you feel really good. How involved are you in the adaptation process?
I want to say that I heard great advice from author Denise Hunter, who was the first of my friends to have a Hallmark movie, The Convenient Groom. And she said something so wise, because it was the same production company with Engage Entertainment. When they asked her that question, Denise said, "I love that you saw something in my story that you could make your own." And so that was my attitude when I went in. It's like, I wonder what they saw in my story that they wanted to make their own. And for me, they kept big chunks of my story. My whole plot arc, they kept. They, of course, could not keep everything. I had a fairy godmother kind of character named Aurora. They didn't keep her for obvious reasons. There's just not enough screen time to do all of that. But the big motivations, some of the dialogue, just the ending and the beginning, all were mine. So I was super impressed that they were able to pull those chunks out of my own story. And if they can't, sometimes they just can't, because a film is so different than a novel, then be grateful that they found a heart and a passion in your work that they thought that they could put on screen. It's just incredible. And I think as artists, we get kind of possessive of our material. And I'm thinking, if anyone could take anything you've done and find an inspiration for their own creativity, you've just added to the chain. You've just, you know, it's great. So that's how I felt about it. And I would advise anybody who's in that place to feel the same way.
How big a part of your life were books as a young child?
Oh, I absolutely loved reading as a kid. Of course, when I was a kid, we only had 3 television channels. So I think my formative years later as a teen, I worked a lot. I worked at a grocery store called Publix here in Florida. And I was a television fan. I love television. I still to this day love television. But books were my safe place, my escape. And so in my household, we were encouraged to read. We were allowed to go to bed and read for half an hour. So we didn't have to turn out the light right away. So that was something. My brother, to this day, my older brother, is still a great reader. My grandmother was a reader. She always had books at her house. So I grew up with it, and I grew up in a generation where you did read. And of course, when I was a kid, they'd have little contests. So if you sold enough candy bars, you could, at school, you could get the book, you know. I was always going for that book. And to this day, when I walk into Barnes & Noble, I'm like, there's that smell. I just love that smell of books. So but I also think it was in me. I was a writer from a young age. Someone gave me a diary when I was 6, and I actually wrote in it. I like chronicled my life at 6 years old. So I think writing itself was in me as much as reading, probably more than reading. I just felt like I had something to say, or I had a story to tell, or I was always dreaming of stories. I had the imaginary friend. And of course, I was in love with Donny Osmond. And so I had all kinds of scenarios where I met Donny Osmond and we were good pals. So I just think imagination was in me, and my parents encouraged me. And I think the number one thing that encouraged me, so to all parents who might ever listen and watch this, encourage your kid. My dad would say to me, Rachel, you're a writer, be a writer. And he said that to me all the way up through college. And even when I was debating a different degree, I had a journalism degree from Ohio State. He was like, no, Rachel, study journalism, hone your craft, be a writer, you're a writer. Laura Ingalls Wilder was my mojo when I was a kid. I think I've read the Little House book a dozen times. So I would read her over and over, and she really was my inspiration. For some reason, I related to her, even though she was born 100 years before I was. She was born in 1867, I believe. I was born in 1960. For some reason, I'm like, we're 60s babies. We're we've got it mojo. So I think that she really encouraged me. I read a lot of biographies.
When you got to the University of Ohio, you majored in journalism. Is it safe to assume by then you knew you wanted to become a professional writer?
So I think really my catalyst into writing was I loved exploring people. So I wanted to tell people stories. I wanted to know about you, and I'm going to make up a story about that. Oh, that's so interesting. I would love to tell a story about that. And I, as far as journalism was concerned, I didn't want to actually tell the facts. So can I make it up? So I knew I had to go into fiction. So anyway, as a journalism major, it's kind of the same thing. I was just writing stories that I was assigned or that I had to go track down. I didn't do a lot of creative writing or fiction courses. I don't know why. I just didn't. I did a lot of political science and things like that. But can't think of anybody in particular other than the classics that we read in college. We did have a Kiplinger fellow that came and taught a magazine writing class. And I wish that I could tell you his name, Jake, because he encouraged me on a level that sticks with me to this day. We had a 3-hour class. We had to submit certain kinds of stories. Everyone got a live class critique. And you all know what that's like, especially writing, especially when it's personal, especially in front of your peers. So on my night, it's a 3-hour class. We get to the last 20 minutes of the class, and I'm thinking, I'm dead. He's just going to rip me to shreds. I wrote a story about driving to school with my brother when we lived in South Florida. And he looks at me down the table and he says, Rachel, do you know what you did? I'm like, no. He said, well, let's just start in the beginning. Symbolism, metaphor. He tied all of these story elements together. You could see that the other students were like, huh? We thought this was stupid. This was so juvenile. What kind of magazine is going to print this? And he looked at me and said, if you can figure out what you did, you can make it as a writer. So to the Kiplinger Fellow in 1985, hats off.
It's very different than it is today, but there's always a mix of serendipity and hard work in landing your first book, first with an agent and then with a publisher. What do you remember about that journey for you?
Yeah, I started reading, so I was married in 92, and after that, I quit my job. So for the first time in my life since I was 14, I didn't have a job or was in school. So I just started writing. And at that time, Christian fiction, which was kind of my first market, was exploding. So my husband and I were reading a lot of it. We didn't have a television, so I thought, I could do this, yeah. And World War II novels were super popular. My husband's father, my father-in-law, was stationed in Aleutian Islands during World War II. So I thought, I'm going to write a book about Aleutian Islands in World War II. So that's what I set out to do. And I finished it, and I got it critiqued, and I rewrote it, and I tore it apart, and I rewrote it. It was about a 2-year process. And I think I sent it out to maybe 5 publishers, and it was rejected, of course. And I put it in the closet, and I went back to work. And then I went to a writer's conference out of the blue and met some woman, and she said, hey, why don't we write together? And she was published for these little tiny category, very, very, very sweet romances, which I will admit, I said, I will never write. I'm not writing these. This is beneath me. Well, that's how I started. I wrote a heart song romance. I wrote 3 of them, actually. And that's how I found an agent. In those days, early days of Christian publishing, you didn't need an agent. You just had to kind of know people, and that's how you met at conferences and things. So I met an agent, Karen Solom's great agent, and then I sold to Thomas Nelson, my first chick lit. Networking is almost as key as talent. You can be super talented, but if you don't know people, which helps you know the process of getting published, it's going to be a long road for you. And I think that's why some authors say I could paper a wall with my rejection slips. I have 5 all total. And that's, I said, that's enough. I need to learn. So conferencing, Now, because of the internet, you can connect through Facebook, getting to know people. I tell new authors that are up and coming, follow your favorite authors on Facebook, follow your agents, or in general, or editors, comment, engage, share the things that they're sharing, shout out things that they're shouting out, because when it's your turn, they're going to want to repay the favor. And also that's how they get to know you. So I think networking, going to conferences, if at all possible, get to an in-person conference. This year, of course, 2020 has been tough for that, but you want to get to an in-person conference. And actually, I had my first chick lit was actually George on Her Mind, published by Harlequin. I sat with the editor at a conference, at the American Christian Fiction Writers Conference. I think it was our second one. And she said, if Rachel can write like she talks, I'm buying her book. So it's really important.
What about when it came back into your hands as a dream come true?
It's like, I finally did it. Yeah. And for me, it was super special because my first book was published in 2004. I actually had two that year. One, a very, very early on ebook. So there you go. I'm a trailblazer. But my dad died the next year. So he got to see the beginning of my journey, and he knew that I had another 2 contracts by the time that he died. So praise God for that.
That's awesome.
So what happened to me though was I became hungry. I want more. And so I had an agent at that point, and she challenged me. She says, you want more? You got to write more. You got to get better. You got to write better stuff. I wanted to go back and write more of those little romances. And she said, I don't think that's going to get you where you want to go. So I had to make a decision. Where's my career going to go? Am I willing to go without a contract and maybe the acceptance of these group of authors that I'd become friends with, to try for something more and something bigger? So I started reading a lot of chick lit. Bridget Jones' Diary was very popular at the time. My friend Kristen Billerbeck came out with a book called What a Girl Wants. And I was like, this is me. And in fact, when I was cleaning out our garage in 2009, I found a book that I wrote about a girl who moved to New York City and lived in an apartment like Mary Tyler Moore. And I was 12. So I was headed straight for it, you know? So that went into me, the business side, which is another thing an author has to think of. You can't just be a writer. You have to think business-wise. So I started thinking, what books are popular? Dorothea Bitten Frank was huge, and she was writing these low country books. So I'm like, what's the low country? So, you know, that's Anne River Sidden, Pat Conroy, Cassandra King, Mary Alice Monroe, all these Southern literary authors, Patty Callahan Henry. And I was like, I've got to write a low country book. So I launched into the Low Country series, which was part romance, part chick lit.
You and country superstar Sarah Evans teamed up for a Nashville-themed romance series. What first brought that collaboration together?
I got an invitation to write with country artist Sarah Evans, and books were kind of directed by her vision, but I did the work for that. And they're called the Nashville series, Nashville Dreams and Nashville Sweetheart. And for that particular series, I had to go to Nashville. I think I went to Nashville 3 times. I can talk country music with the best of them now. At least I used to be able to. I had a friend who wrote a book about a country music artist, and she had been in Nashville for 7 years, and she was quitting and going to go back home. And I said, it's 9 years. It's a 9-year town. You have to stay at least 9 years. That's what the songwriters told me. So I was like pretty much expert. I went to the Bluebird many times. I met James Dean Hicks. I just loved hanging out there. So Nashville was very important to visit, to do the Nashville books and to get the vibe of country music. It is very unique and very cool and very fun. So I do think it's important. If you can't, thankfully today we have Google Maps and we have the internet, and I visit a lot of places that way. But if it's something as specific, like my characters get seeped into the culture of whatever it is they're doing. So if I have a songwriter or an artist, I can't pretend to know. For example, I had an artist in the Nashville Sweetheart. The character Aubrey James was in a conflict with her record label. I searched and searched and searched. What's a conflict with a record label? What are they conflicting over? Creative differences. I could not find anything specific, and I could not have a character sit across from the table and go, I don't like these creative differences, because that's not what they're saying, right? They would be saying it's this and this and this. And I read a book, Conversations with Tom Petty. And even though it was set in the 70s, He was in a conflict over the price of his album. And eventually I was able to talk to an entertainment attorney and get some more specific language. But I needed to know, so I had to really dig in to find out what conversations these characters were going to have behind closed doors. So that's very important.
When did the brilliant concept for the wedding series, which debuts with the wedding dress, first hit you? And tell us a bit about how you decided on the timeline, the way you told the story. It's very unique.
The wedding dress came to me on a girls' weekend outside of Nashville, Tennessee. So some Twitter friends, we said, let's get together. And then we said, hey, let's not just say it, let's do it. Next thing you know, we're planning a weekend together in Gallatin, Tennessee. Is that right? Gallatin? Is that outside of Nashville?
Yeah, Gallatin is, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we were in Gallatin, Tennessee. And we were talking about our host's daughter getting married. And she said, boy, when she put on that wedding dress, we just knew. I was gone. Immediately, I was like, ooh, a family wedding dress, 100-year-old wedding dress. Ooh, they all wore it. What did that look like? And they started talking about business because one of them was a VP of marketing and one of them has a former lawyer and our host had been the former president of Borders. And they were off talking about business. And I go, hey guys, what about a wedding dress that 4 women wear over 100 years? And they said, well, yeah, Rachel, you should work on that. And then later they came back to me and that's a good idea. Yeah. But it was the one that gave me the chills. And so I had read a split time novel by Susan Meisner called Shape of Mercy. And I was fascinated by looking back in time to see how it impacted the present. And if we all could, wouldn't we want to go back and talk to our ancestors and go, why did you decide to do that? Because that's impacted me today. You moved from Ohio to California, or from California to Ohio, or you divorced that guy and married this guy, or that woman, and now there's me, right? So every decision that our ancestors made lead us to where we are. We don't have to be trapped by it, but it certainly has guided who we become. So that's what fascinated me the most. It's kind of like a unique form of time travel. So I conceived of Emily in 1912 and then Charlotte in 2012. And I knew that I wanted them to be unconnected. They did not know grandmother, granddaughter. So Emily is Charlotte's great-grandmother. And so originally I thought it's kind of boring to have the dress pass through the family because that's what you would expect. What if the dress kind of moves mysteriously, kind of magically, supernaturally, and finds the right woman? And kind of the hook is that it fits every woman who tries it on without being altered. And so I actually did go to a wedding dress display in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And there was a wedding dress from the 30s that 5 women wore, all different shapes and sizes, and it fit every single one of them. So it's possible, it's even possible. So that kind of became how I wanted to tell the story. And the story was in the dress and what the dress represented to each woman who wore it. And for me also, having a spiritual storyline in my books also represented how the gospel fits everyone who tries it on. So
that really was the first book that launched you into the national stratosphere as a known author, wasn't it?
It did. I think I knew it was going to be special, and a lot of people told me, this is special. There's a feel about it. And so when it came out, it did well right from the get-go. So I was happy with that. But then so it came out in 2012. In 2015, it hit the USA Today, 3 years later. So it was super crazy. What? Okay. Before that, I think over Christmas time, it was the Amazon when they did daily deals. It was the New Year's Eve daily deal. Now, the two most popular days were Christmas and New Year's Eve for ebook downloads. So I got one of those days. My friend Colleen Coble actually had Christmas, and it blew up. Even the head company, HarperCollins, was like, what's going on? What's going on with this book? Where's this book from? What's it doing? Was it one of those books with a bonnet on it? It was one of those Amish books, because Amish books were still so popular in 2013. And then we go into 2016 and they put it on sale again. And I have to be honest, because I had just had the Wedding Chapel come out in November. So in February of 2016, they're like, Rachel, we're putting the wedding dress on sale again. I was like, okay, I have other books, And Amazon put it on the front page of their monthly deals. And it was the 4th book in, and it just skyrocketed. And it sat on the New York Times for 9 weeks, a 4-year-old book, 9 weeks. So hallelujah. And it hit the Wall Street Journal at that point too. So I was glad, because I do feel like it's a transcendent story. I feel like it's a story that's about more than something special in majority of women's lives. Putting on your wedding dress, or your daughter's wedding dress, or your grandmother's wedding dress. It's the story of family, the story of love, but it was really the story of how hope transcends time and faith transcends time. So I think that's one of the things that's so popular about the book.
Take us back inside the memory house when you first started building that beautiful book in your creative mind.
As far as an author's writing style, you write who you are. So all of my stories, whether I want to or not, have some overarching theme of destiny, of knowing who you are, finding out who you really are, finding out who loves you, finding out you're the head, not the tail. Like, it's just in me. So if you had a conversation with me, I'm the cheerleader. I'm like, come on, you can do it. Come on, rise up out of the dirt. Come on, don't let that guy get you down. That would be me. So I think there's some voice of that in all my stories. As far as the split time, how do you connect the past and the present and be creative? How many times can it be the grandmother and the granddaughter, or the grandfather and the grandson, or whatever? You have to start getting creative. And so I thought, who am I impacted by in the past that maybe I don't know? So that's how I started kind of mixing it up and having connections that were either close family friends or strangers in that matter. So with the memory house, the main character, Beck, has lost her memory. She has amnesia, and she can't remember her teenage years. She can't remember her father. She's a cop in New York City, and she has gotten herself into trouble. She's pregnant by her lieutenant, who's married. She's punched a perp, and she's suspended. At the same time, she finds out she has inherited this house in Fernandina Beach, Florida, which is up by Jacksonville. And her parents advise her to go, her mother and stepfather advise her to go check it out. And she's like, I don't even remember this place. And they said, well, you can't stay around here. And she's trying to hide the fact that she's pregnant. So her mom doesn't even know. So she's thinking, well, I can go down there and at least have a month to figure out what I'm going to do. So when she goes, and she runs into the boy that she liked when she was 13 and 14, who she does not remember, but who definitely remembers her. His name is Bruno. And then the historical part set in 1950s and 1960 Waco, Texas. And that became a plot line when I visited Waco, Texas, and I learned that they had this devastating tornado in 1953, I think, 1952, that just kind of swept through the town and was a surprise. And it killed like 130 people. And so I thought, this is an interesting backdrop. So Everly, the character there, she's a newlywed. She's just found out she's pregnant. And her husband's father-in-law, mother-in-law, and father are all killed in this tornado. And so she ends up living like a widow into her 30s until a young man from her past walks into her life. And he sees something beyond the dowdy, hair back in a bun, sensible shoes woman. When I think of her, when she first walks on the scene, I think of Mary Hatch in It's a Wonderful Life. When Clarence tells George, she's about to close the library, and she comes out with her glasses so prim and proper. And I think that was Everly until she meets this character, Dawn. And they're the ones who bought this house, this big old Victorian house in Fernandina Beach, Florida. And I just love Victorian things. I had written a story with part of the Gilded Age. And if you're going to do something historical, have something that is a center object. So for me, one of the things I do always have in the dual times is I have a wedding dress, a writing desk, a memory house, a love letter. There's always something central to the story that kind of is the hook that drives the characters forward or drives the characters back. So,
with the wonderful lead characters that guide readers through the writing desk, take us inside a little bit of their creation and also how dialogue tends to come to you as you're writing.
Thank you for that compliment, by the way, because I love dialogue. So Tinley Roth, Tinley is actually the daughter of my former editor. She was born about the time that I started writing the book, and I thought, this is a super cool name. And then Roth is a family name. And then Bertie Shehorn was just something I thought sounded Gilded Age. And I did search a lot of the Gilded Age records to kind of get a feel for what the names were. And a lot of them were Dutch descents. And so I kind of tried to lean towards a Dutch sounding name. Her real name was Elizabeth, but I called her Bertie. And so that was kind of the genesis for their names. And both of them are writers and wanted to be writers. Bertie's the Gilded Age character. And her mother kind of gave her the Consuela Vanderbilt. Is that right? Yes. The one who married the Duke of Marlborough kind of pushed her into marriage. And so I just had a brain fart there. But yeah, Consuelo was forced into marrying this British nobility. And my character's mother was trying to force her to do the same thing, marry somebody that she did not love. Actually, she did love someone from the British nobility, but he wasn't good enough for her mom. Anyway, so that's kind of the genesis of that story. And that just kind of unfolded on its own as I wrote it. As for dialogue, I absolutely love dialogue. And for all writers out there, I'm saying, and it's true, you want to tell the story between the quotes. The most powerful part of the story and what causes tension is dialogue. So when your character walks onto the stage, if you're watching a play, even if they're moving about, you don't know anything until they start speaking. You hear their voice, you hear their accent, you hear their tone. That's when you're like, oh, I like that guy. Oh, I don't like that guy. And then you start seeing their interaction with other people. And you want the best lines and the best descriptions as possible to be between the quotes. So characters who go, hello, how are you? I'm okay. And then all the stuff like, he really wanted to know if he could ask her out for a date is over here. This girl can't respond to him. So if he goes, I really want to ask you out on a date. Now she responds, okay, now we're off and running. Now what's going to happen? To me, dialogue drives the story. I usually just see it in my head. I do eavesdrop a lot on real life conversation. In fact, my husband has a saying, be careful, anything you say can and probably will show up in one of Rachel's novels. And I have actually quoted people before. But the other thing is I do sometimes sound it out. So I have a really funny story about this. I was writing Softly and Tenderly, which is one of the books that I wrote with Sarah Evans. And I had created a character who was a perpetual adulterer. And in fact, the opening scene, the main character, June and Jade, and June, his wife, his name is Rebel of all things. They're very wealthy lawyers in Tennessee. They're coming home. June walks upstairs in their elaborate home. She walks into her room. She comes back down and she says, not in my home, Rebel, not in my home. Well, Jade, the daughter-in-law, is like, what, oh my, what is this? And they're acting like it's an everyday thing. He's coming out, kind of putting himself back together and going, I didn't know you were going to come home. And then the woman, I'm sorry, June. So she's a friend of June. She's running out. So I knew I was just going to say sometimes how things like that catch us. Like you might have a cigarette and go, no, I'm never having another one. I might have one and become a heavy smoker. Like we never know when those things are going to catch us. And so that was my thought with Rebel. He cheated once and then he just got caught. So as I was writing the confrontation scene, I was writing in circles. I just got caught, June. I just got caught. And I thought, this is boring. So I got up, I walked into the bathroom and I said, why did you do it, Rebel? Why did you do it? And he said, you stole my son. And I went, oh, what? So now a whole new story unfolded and she was the one who cheated. He didn't know for sure if their son was his or that other guy's because the time frame kind of didn't line up. But yet, this kind of bastard of a guy loved that boy like his own and never, ever questioned his paternity. And so in a way, I was able to redeem him, but it was so fun when he said that, you stole my son. I was like, wow, what's that? So I think you can do it all kinds of ways, but definitely tell the best you can between the quotes. When I'm stuck or whenever you find yourself like your characters are basically saying the same thing over and over. And I've read books where they said the same thing over and over for a couple of chapters. No, guys, stop. Get out of that and figure out what really is happening. Go a layer deeper. Ask why.
The love letter is another one of your fan favorites. Tell us about how complicated that was, setting the book up basically through one long letter.
For the love letter, it was going to be one letter. So I was thinking, like, how did this one letter impact these people's lives? So the original idea for this was, those germs of ideas always are like this, and then they turn into something completely different. But this one was, what if the descendants of two people who couldn't get together, who loved each other and something happened where they couldn't get together, what if they met and fell in love? So that's really what I was going after. So my historical characters are Hamilton and Esther. They live in upcountry South Carolina in the 1780s. They are a part of the Revolutionary War. The Battle of Cowpens was a major battle in 1781 that actually turned the tide of the war. So if you've seen the movie The Patriot, some of it is based on the Battle of Cowpens. A lot of those a lot of what they went through, and Mel Gibson's character is the Battle of Cowpens. So they loved each other, but he was a patriot and she was of British descent. Her father was a Tory through and through. He did not want to have anything to do with the Patriots. And so, but they loved each other secretly, and he sent her away. And so they tried to send letters, but you know, one of the things when you're writing historicals, and we live in this instant communication era, I had to figure out that a letter, one, may never get there, and two, may take 3 months to get there. So there's no like, that's why the war, we go, that war was 6 years long, but there was only about 6 or 7 battles because it took years to communicate. It took years to communicate to England. I mean, I think that they threatened war for like 10 years before they finally threw down the gauntlet. So that was one of the elements that I had to struggle with. But actually, it was a letter that was written in the 1880s to, I think it was from Hamilton to Esther, or one of them, saying, basically, I've always loved you. And his descendant, Jesse, finds it. And he's curious, what is this unrequited love that my ancestor had? And he had kind of a broken heart, that his backstory is. His love story is very kind of broken and dark. And so he was trying to heal himself by writing a screenplay based on this letter. And then through the course of the book, he meets, Chloe, I really stuck there. He meets Chloe, who was a descendant of Esther.
With the wonderful stories that you weave book in and out, do you tend to do storyboarding before you begin working?
Well, let me show you this first. It's right here. I use this book called The Story Equation. I think I have too much bright light there. This is called The Story Equation by Susie May Warren. She's been my writing partner for about 18 years. I use this, and I always develop the character internally first. So I figure out their dark moment story, like what was that thing that happened to them in the past that created a wound, that developed to a lie, which turned into a fear. And really, ultimately, that's what the story is about, healing. And that's going to be the epiphany at the end. Like, you mean I'm not that person, or that thing that happened to me, I can be healed of that. That's what story is really about, is bringing us to truth. So I use this, and once I have the characters develop all the things that I want, their superpower, what they're good at, what do they want, what's the story question, what's their secret desire, I try to contrast that with their greatest fear. Once I work all of that, then I go through a plotting roadmap. And I write that on big sticky sheets that I type on the wall. I have a whiteboard in the garage that I always process through. About the middle of the book, I go down and start writing on that. I also use Scrivener, which a lot of writers use, and it does kind of have the note card approach. And then it has a companion program called Scapple, which is more or less an electronic whiteboard. And sometimes I just start brainstorming on that. So I'm very eclectic. You should see my desk. It's cluttered with notes and notebooks where I just scribble ideas so that I don't forget, like I've written something on the scene and I'm like, ooh, that's kind of small, but I need to remember that for later. That'll really ping later in the story. So I write that down. I have sticky notes on my desk. So I'm an eclectic processor. So
turning the page to another one of your most popular books, To Love a Prince, was that title one that came to you quickly? And do they usually?
I thought I was going to be horrible at titles. I never really came up with a good title. I'm like, how do you come up with a title? But after I started writing, I kind of got the hang of it. And titles actually are the first thing I come up with. They're my actual initial hook. And I like strong titles because titles should tell the buyer, the reader, the bookseller, this is what this story is about. There should always be, to me anyway, some hard understanding of what, without reading the whole back cover copy. Not all titles can be that way. With To Love a Prince, that was a little bit harder because I have Once Upon a Prince and I have How to Catch a Prince. So I had already written some royal stories with Prince in the title. But when I knew I was going to write a 3-series book based on this House of Blues, I just love the name Blue. And I thought Royal Blue, House of Blue, I'll be a little catchy there with that. I thought, what do I need? So I came up with To Save a King and To Win a Crown. So then I backed in To Love a Prince. And I just love To Love a Prince, To Save a King, To Win a Crown. So that kind of, those are cohesive titles. They obviously tell you that they're in the same series, but they also tell you they're about something different. So they also have to be distinctive because sometimes we have titles with alliteration they all start with the same letter, and you're kind of like, which comes first? Or I don't understand which one comes first. So I try to be a little clear in that. But I do have plenty of people who write me and go, which is first in the series? So this book, To Love a Prince, you know it's about someone falling in love with a prince, and you know it's about royalty, which is a trope, which is a popular trope. So you either are going to know right away, I like it, or I'm going to bypass that. I don't like royal stories. I encourage everyone to try at least one.
It must have been fun to win the Romantic Times Inspirational Novel of the Year award, and then to get a Career Achievement Award. You still have so many years of writing ahead of you. How did that feel?
So The Wedding Dress won Romantic Times Inspirational Novel of the Year. And to be honest, I loved that award because I was not a big award winner. I did not final a lot. I did not win a lot of pre-published contests, even though I had people tell me, oh, you're going to win. Don't tell anybody. I didn't even final. So I didn't come out the gate strong. Let me just say that the Nashville books, my first ones with Thomas Nelson, did not sell well. So if that's for any author listening, hang in there. But I loved the RT award because they chose it. I didn't have to enter. The reviewers looked across the books for that year and said this was the winner. And I was told by someone on the selection committee that hands down that she didn't have to convince anybody The Wedding Dress was the winner. So I was very grateful to RT for that. I was very honored. And then in 17, maybe 18, they gave me the Career Achievement Award. And that was them just selecting me for that award. Again, it was a huge honor, but I was kind of like, wait, I haven't written enough yet. Are you sure? I'm still at this, because I think 16 years in writing full time, and I just feel like I'm getting up a head of steam now. So, writing takes a long time to build up a head of steam. You have to really write a lot to gain your readers and to gain their trust.
You must still get excited when a new character pops into your head in the middle of the night and wakes you up.
My motivation to write is having written. When I hold this book in my hand, there were times when I was writing this, and probably on every book, that I said, okay, can I quit now? My writing partner, Susie Warren, I call about the middle of every book and say, this is boring. I don't like it. Nobody's going to want to read it. And she's like, yeah, you always say it. So what else is going on? She has stopped encouraging me. Even my neighbor, who I hardly talk to about my writing, I said that to her one time, and she said, you always say that. And I said, I must always say that. If she's saying I say it. But I love having written. And when this book came out, I was so excited. It was such an achievement for me. I had hired the audio reader for it, a woman, Louise Lee, who I loved. I thought she did a fabulous job. And so just having produced a book and just getting a story out there that I honestly believed that was going to just leave people sighing at the end. And especially in 2020, when we've had such an unusual year, having a book of hope, of love, of destiny that makes you just go, wow, that was good. And I hope that when people finish reading my stories, that they look up and they love the person across the room a little bit more, that they've been inspired to overcome their own attitudes or their own troubles and go, I'm going to choose love over anger or over resentment. And sometimes we have to work through that, but I think we can never do wrong in choosing to love well. And that's kind of what I hope my stories do. And so that motivates me to write. And after writing 30 books, I'm kind of like, yeah, you know what you're doing. Just get in there and press in on the hard days. You're going to get this done. Don't worry.
Along the same lines, you have a bit of a creative radar that's always up, don't you? Catch little bits of things that wind up in your new books?
Yeah, so my husband, this is where he came up with the saying, stop, whatever you say from this point on will probably end up in one of Rachel's novels. So my husband taught part-time at a small private school for a season. And at the Christmas party, we were at one of the other teachers' homes. And so I'm sitting across the table from this young couple, and she was one of the elementary school teachers. And we're all eating this delicious chili, and the man is not eating. The husband's not eating. And I'm looking at him, and I said, don't you want to get anything? There's no line. You can go. And he said, I don't eat food at other people's houses. I said, what? He said, I don't eat food at other people's houses. And I said, oh, why not? Then he said, because I didn't see how it was prepared. And I'm like, but you can go look in our kitchen and see it's clean and whatever. And I'm like, seriously? And I go, what do you eat? He goes, well, I eat at my house. And I said, do you eat pizza? And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, you didn't see how that was prepared? I go, do you eat frozen food? And he said, yeah. And I'm like, you definitely don't know how frozen food is prepared. Did you read Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential? You'll never eat at a restaurant again. And I started drilling him. How long have you had this phobia? Does anybody else in your family have this phobia? Are you helping him get over it? How do you feel about this phobia? Does it drive you crazy? And that's when my husband said, stop. I'm sorry, she's turned into writer mode right now. And Rachel, just back up a little bit. And I realized, I actually think I made the kid doubt his own phobia. And I don't know what happened to him. I don't know if he's learned to eat food in other people's houses or not, but he did actually make it into a book.
You mentioned Chick Lit earlier, and you're definitely one of its founding members. How does it feel to know so many mothers and daughters have now grown up reading your books and become lifelong fans?
I think at the end of the day, that's what life is about. Did you inspire someone else? We always have the saying at my church, my husband's a pastor, and so we always say, our ceiling must be the next generation's floor. So what are we building for them to stand on? And so for me, and kind of in this faith-based market, that one, I feel like we do write stories that anyone can read in the general market and in the faith-based market. But also, am I leaving books behind that the world can be proud of so that people who want to write stories like mine can go, she did it, I can do it? Am I leaving you inspiration? Am I creating a ceiling for you to stand on? And so that's ultimately my goal. I love to mentor. I love to help people with their writing and encourage them, because I also know what it's like to want to do something so very desperately and feeling like you weren't getting anywhere. And if I can pull someone else up, I'm going to. And also that pulls me up. I think we kind of have this mentality, if you succeed, I'm going to fail. But that's not true. If you succeed, maybe that means I succeed. So the more that we succeed together, the more all the boats float, right? So we'll all succeed if we help each other. So I love encouraging coming up writers.
I know fans have their favorites from your 30 books. What are a few of yours?
Well, in general, you're proud of all of them. You know that. But I really am proud of The Wedding Dress. I love the Royal series. And I'm proud of Once Upon a Prince because it did inspire film. The Wedding Dress actually has a script. And so hopefully that will be filming sometime in the next year. A couple other books under option that are going to film. And so those are always kind of, you're happy because they're continuing on. They're back alive. They're not your backlist. They're kind of have a front list project on them. But I would say The Wedding Dress, one of my books with Sarah Evans, Softly and Tenderly, there was a scene in that book. I cried when I cried just thinking I was going to write it. I cried when I wrote it. I cried when I edited it. I cried when I proofed it. I cried when I went through the final galley. I cried when I listened to it on audio. And I was talking to somebody about it last year, and I cried when I was telling her about it. There's just something about that book that just touched me deeply. And then I think my book that I wrote called Fifth Avenue Story Society, I really loved that book. It was a true labor, probably the hardest book that I ever wrote. Definitely the hardest editorial process I ever went through. After 16 years, I get the worst editorial letter of my life. Thank goodness I had those years of experience, or I might have crumbled. But that one, and I actually think that would be a great TV show. It has a kind of This Is Us kind of feel about it. So I love that book. And then To Love a Prince, because it's the first one I just took a leap of faith and produced on my own. Just because I think as authors, we have to keep challenging ourselves and we have to keep trying new things. And in today's world, it is fantastic to be partner with a publisher. Love my publisher. Want to continue in traditional publishing, but it's kind of like divesting your portfolio. Having a title that you can manage on your own and do on your own, if you have the time to do that, if you have the wherewithal to take a break from those advance checks to launch out on your own, it's just a nice diversion, and you can write a little bit more what you want rather than being subject to maybe what the publisher is looking to fill their slots with. So both are great. So I think I'm proud of To Love a Prince because I actually did it. I didn't say I was going to do it. I actually did it.
What can readers expect to see next from you on the bookshelf?
Future is going to be To Save a King and then To Win a Crown, and that's in the True Blue Royal series. To Save a King is about the actual crown prince who in the first book, To Love a Prince, has gotten married. But in the next book, he's no longer married. So we're going to find out that story. And in the first book, we find out, rather unusually, that the queen had a child that she did not raise herself. She had a child with her first lover, and he raised her in America. And she never, ever told anybody about this child. And of course, it comes to light in the first book. And so we're going to find out what happens to her. Her name is Scotty. And is she going to choose to join the royal family or not? So that was an interesting twist for me. I thought that was really fun.
Rachel, it's been an absolute blast talking to you. Thank you so much for being on About the Authors TV.
Thank you. You were awesome. This was fun.